Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. It all started with an argument, like most things do in a marriage. It was mid-December, and we were planning our Christmas break. Miranda wanted to go to her parents' place in her small hometown of Hartwell, where we'd spent the last 2 Christmases. I, on the other hand, wanted to visit my parents in New Haven. Fair is fair, right? 2 years with her family, 1 with mine. "Dylan," she said, folding her arms and giving me that no-nonsense look she'd perfected over the years. "We always have such a good time at my parents'. They have the big house, the fireplace, the traditions." "And what about my parents?" I shot back. "They've been asking when we'll come for Christmas. My mom keeps dropping hints about how much she misses us. We were just there in the summer." "For 2 days, Miranda. 2 days isn't Christmas." She huffed, and I could see the storm brewing. "Dylan, I'm going to my parents. If you want to come, great. If not, fine." "That's not fair, Miranda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're just deciding for both of us?" "Well, someone has to. You're impossible to reason with." "Reason? That's rich coming from the woman who vetoes anything that isn't her idea." And just like that, the decision was made. I'd go to New Haven. She'd go to Hartwell. We kissed each other goodbye on December 22nd, a little colder than usual, and promised to call every day. The first few days were fine. My parents were thrilled to have me, and I felt good about standing my ground. But something felt off. Miranda wasn't calling as much as she usually did, and when she did, she sounded distracted. "Hey, how's everything going over there?" I asked during one of our calls, trying to keep it casual. "It's fine," she said with a forced laugh. "Just busy with all the family stuff. You know how it is." "Yeah, I get it. You sure you're okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, Dylan. Just tired from all the running around." Something in her tone didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. It was Christmas after all. Who wants to fight during the holidays? Miranda came back home on December 28th. She looked different. Tired, sure, but also uneasy. Her usual energy, the way she'd hum a tune as she unpacked or excitedly recount every little detail about her trip, was absent. Instead, she was quiet, her movements mechanical, her gaze darting away whenever I tried to meet her eyes. "How was Hartwell?" I asked as we unpacked her suitcase together. "It was fine," she said, her voice clipped. She focused on neatly folding a sweater, avoiding my eyes. "You know how it is. Lots of family, lots of food." "Anything interesting happen?" I pressed, trying to spark a more natural conversation. "Nope. Same old Hartwell," she replied, shutting the suitcase with a little more force than necessary. I let the conversation drop, but something felt off. Miranda wasn't usually this reserved. Normally, she'd talk my ear off about her family's antics, her dad's terrible jokes, her mom's over-the-top Christmas decorations, or her sister's latest drama. But now, nothing. Just a wall. Over the next week, the unease didn't go away. It grew. Miranda was glued to her phone more than usual, texting or scrolling with a focus that felt deliberate. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock the screen and shove the phone into her pocket. During dinner, she barely touched her food. I watched as she pushed her mashed potatoes around the plate, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. "Is everything okay?" I asked one night, trying to sound casual. "What?" "Oh yeah," she said, snapping back to the present. "Just tired, that's all." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't like her to brush me off like this. Usually, Miranda couldn't keep a secret to save her life. Now she was like a closed book, every page locked behind a heavy curtain of avoidance. One night I couldn't take it anymore. The silence between us had become unbearable. After dinner, as we sat on the couch, I decided to confront her. "Miranda," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what's going on with you?" She froze for a moment, then looked at me with a carefully neutral expression. "Nothing," she said too quickly, her voice a little higher than usual. "Why would you think something's wrong?" "Because you've been acting weird since you got back," I said, leaning forward. "Distant, secretive. It's not like you. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." She sighed deeply, rubbing her temples like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. "It's just work stress, Dylan," she said, her tone weary. "The holidays were supposed to be relaxing, but now I'm back to the grind and it's overwhelming. That's all it is." I frowned. Work stress? That didn't make sense. Miranda loved her job. It had its challenges, sure, but she thrived on them. She was the kind of person who'd come home excited about a tough project or a big meeting. Stress like this was out of character. "Miranda," I said gently, "you've never let work get to you like this before. Are you sure that's all it is?" "What else would it be?" she snapped, her eyes flashing for a moment before she softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. I'm just tired." Her apology felt rehearsed, like she'd anticipated this conversation and had a script ready. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the pieces didn't fit. Something wasn't adding up, and I could feel the distance between us growing like a chasm I couldn't bridge. For the rest of the night, we sat in silence. She scrolled through her phone and I stared at the TV, not really watching. The tension in the room was suffocating. Whatever was going on with Miranda, I knew it wasn't just work stress. And the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something big. Then came the clinic visit. Miranda told me she was going to the doctor for a routine checkup. "No big deal," she said casually over breakfast. Her tone was nonchalant, but I caught the slight tremble in her hands as she stirred her coffee. I watched her leave that morning with a pit in my stomach, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. When she came back later that afternoon, she looked pale as a ghost. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a jittery, withdrawn energy. She barely glanced at me as she dropped her bag by the door and headed straight for the bedroom. "What did the doctor say?" I asked, following her, genuinely concerned. "Oh, just some minor things," she said, her voice flat. "Nothing to worry about." That was the first outright lie she told me, though I didn't know it at the time. She avoided eye contact, busying herself with tidying up non-existent messes. The conversation ended there, but her behavior stayed with me. A few days later, I was taking out the trash when a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. It was a receipt from the clinic. My heart sank as I read the words, "STD panel, comprehensive testing." I stared at the paper, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell was going on? Why would Miranda need to get tested for STDs? My stomach twisted as a horrible thought began to form. That night, Miranda went to bed early, claiming she had a headache. I stayed up, staring at the TV but not really watching. My mind was racing, replaying every strange moment from the past few weeks. Finally, unable to hold back my suspicion any longer, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I crept into the bedroom, careful not to wake her. Miranda was fast asleep, her phone on the nightstand beside her. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unlocked it. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was drowned out by the gnawing need for answers. The first few messages in her inbox seemed normal. Conversations with her mom, her sister, a few work colleagues. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Tom. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen. Who was Tom? I'd never heard her mention him before. My stomach churned as I opened the thread, my hands shaking. The first message was from a week before Christmas. "Hey Miranda, I heard you're back in Hartwell for the holidays. There's a party at my place on Christmas Eve if you want to stop by. It'd be great to catch up," Tom wrote. Her response came a few hours later. "Hey Tom, that sounds like fun. I might swing by if I can sneak away from the family," Miranda replied. I felt my chest tighten as I scrolled further. There were more messages, ones that made my heart pound harder with every word. Tom, December 26th. "Last night was amazing, Miranda. I've missed you. How are you today?" Miranda, "I'm fine, Tom. Just feeling a little weird about everything. I need some time to process." "Last night was amazing? I've missed you? What the hell did that mean?" I kept scrolling, trying to make sense of it. Then I saw a photo. It wasn't explicit, but it was damning. The two of them at the party standing close, too close. Miranda's cheeks were flushed, her arm looped casually around his shoulders. The way they looked at each other made my stomach churn. I couldn't stop myself. I dug deeper, searching for any clue about who this guy was. I opened her contacts, social media, and old photos. That's when I pieced it together. Tom wasn't just some random friend from Hartwell. He was her ex-boyfriend. I sat back, stunned, the phone still clutched in my hands. Tom, the guy she'd been with for years before we met. The guy she never talked about much, brushing off their breakup as ancient history. And now it seemed they'd crossed paths again, more than just crossed paths. The realization hit me like a freight train. Miranda had reconnected with her ex over Christmas, and from the messages I'd seen, it hadn't been innocent. I put her phone back on the nightstand and stumbled into the living room, my mind racing. My chest felt tight, my stomach twisted in knots. The thought of her with someone else, him, made my blood boil. Was this why she'd been acting so strange since she got back? And the STD panel? What did that mean? I spent the rest of the night on the couch, staring at nothing, my mind a storm of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this. The next morning I left before Miranda woke up, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head and make sense of everything. The quiet hum of the engine and the open road gave me little comfort, but it was better than staying in the house. I returned home just after lunch, knowing I couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. I waited for her to come back. By the time the front door opened, I was sitting at the dining table with the crumpled receipt in front of me. I pretended not to know. About Tom, the party, everything. I needed to hear her admit it, even though I already had a pretty good idea. "Miranda," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "What's this?" She stepped inside and froze, her eyes going wide. The color drained from her face as she stared at the receipt, then back at me. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the trash," I replied, my words sharp. "What's going on?" She hesitated, her hands trembling as she slowly lowered herself into the chair across from me. "Dylan, I need to tell you something." "Yeah, you do," I snapped, struggling to keep my composure. Every ounce of strength was required to keep from losing it entirely. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I barely noticed. I could barely look at her. "When I was in Hartwell, I went to this Christmas party. It was at an old friend's house and things got out of hand." "What do you mean, out of hand?" I demanded, leaning forward, my heart pounding in my chest. She faltered, staring down at her hands. "I drank too much. I wasn't thinking clearly. I slept with someone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The air seemed to leave the room. My mind raced as I tried to process what she had just said. "You cheated on me?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Dylan, I swear. It was a mistake, a stupid, horrible mistake." I stood up, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't breathe. "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk, Miranda. Sleeping with someone else isn't a mistake. That's betrayal." She was crying harder now, and part of me wanted to comfort her, but the overwhelming pain and fury wouldn't let me. "Who was it? Do I know him?" I demanded, my fists clenched at my sides. "No," she whispered. "He was just some guy at the party." "Just some guy?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You threw away 6 years of marriage for just some guy?" "I didn't throw it away," she cried. I leaned in, my voice ice cold. "You're lying to me even now?" "I know it's Tom, your ex-boyfriend. I know everything." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dylan. I love you. I messed up, but it doesn't mean I don't love you." I laughed bitterly, a hollow sound that filled the room. "Love? You call this love? And what about the STD test, Miranda? Did you give me something?" She shook her head frantically, trying to reach out to me. "No, I haven't been with you since it happened. I wanted to make sure I was okay before we what?" I shot back, the last shred of patience snapping. "Before we what, Miranda? So you could keep pretending nothing happened? So you could lie to me? To both of us?" Her voice trailed off as she shrunk into herself, her hands twisting together in her lap. I could feel my blood boiling as I processed everything. "You've been walking around here acting like everything's fine, while hiding this from me?" I could barely contain the bitterness in my voice. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "I swear, Dylan, it was a mistake. It was the biggest mistake of my life," she pleaded, her voice breaking. I shook my head, disgust creeping in. "I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm filing for divorce. We're done." Without another word, I grabbed my coat from the hallway and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The finality of it was almost too much to bear, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend anymore. The next morning, I found myself at a lawyer's office. Filling out the paperwork felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. Divorce wasn't something I ever imagined, but it felt like the only option. The lawyer walked me through protecting my assets, and with every signature, a strange sense of finality settled over me. Weeks passed, and I kept my distance from Miranda, only speaking when absolutely necessary. Her calls and messages became fewer and fewer, eventually stopping altogether. The divorce was finalized, and Miranda walked away with nothing. She had no claim to the house or any of our assets. I had ensured that everything was divided in my favor. Eventually, I sold the house and moved forward, leaving everything behind. In the end, though, I knew one thing for sure. I was better off alone. The man I had been before, full of hope, trust, and love, had been destroyed. But in his place was someone stronger. Someone who had learned the hard way that love was not enough to fix what had been broken. As the months passed, I began to rebuild. Slowly, piece by piece. There were still moments when I thought about Miranda, when the pain of everything we had shared resurfaced. But it wasn't the same. I had moved on. Thank you for watching.